Well, friends, our scripture lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon, and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" And they said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me, or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Well, one of the things that has certainly become ubiquitous, and I think makes just about everybody uncomfortable, is this. We've all seen it. Every time we buy something now, all right, up comes that screen. And you see, you're never sure what to do depending on the circumstances. And I see the person behind the counter sometimes turning away because they don't even want to see if your hand goes to the left or to the right because they know what that means. And there's all kinds of arguments about this. There are opinions all over the place. Some people say, well, they should just pay the people higher wages, so they don't have to rely on the tips. And then other people saying, but then all the prices would be higher. They should have lower prices, and you can decide how much you're going to give the employee. And this all boils down to these arguments of what is fair? What constitutes fair in this circumstance? And fair is a really difficult thing for us to achieve, and I'm not even sure it's the right thing for us to try to achieve. And we're going to talk about that as we go through our passage today, which begins with a very normal-sounding situation. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner. So Jesus is just telling a story. This isn't a real story. He's just telling a story. It's like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. This is a very familiar situation. It's a familiar situation even in our area where there are places where one can hire day laborers and you go and pick them up if you have a task to be done, and they're there waiting to be hired to do this. And it says that after agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Now, there's one little detail here that you should remember, which is that this is the only point in the story where Jesus, or I shouldn't say Jesus, it's the landowner, but we always believe that the landowner represents God, represents Jesus in this story, but where the landowner has agreed to a specific wage. So in the rest of the story, he doesn't actually say what they're going to get paid. So this is the only one where he's agreeing to get paid the usual daily wage, which we've talked about in other passages, is that coin, the denarius, was generally regarded to be a typical daily wage. So normally it was you get a denarius for a day's work. So pretty standard. Goes out, gets some laborers, promises them a certain amount of money, sends them into the vineyard to do work. Then he goes out to the next groups. And when he goes out to the next groups, he doesn't actually say how much they're going to get paid. It says that I will pay you whatever is right. Okay? So it's up to interpretation. He's simply making a promise. They don't know what they're going to get. By the way, just as an aside, in terms of the translation, just so you understand what's happening, is when they give the times in the scripture passage in English, they're translating times because they didn't keep time in the same way that we do now. So what happens is that in the actual Greek, it refers to the third hour, the sixth hour, the ninth hour, and for the purposes of translation, what they did was they presumed that workers worked from sunup to sundown, and then to make it easy, they presumed that 6 a.m. was sunrise and 6 p.m. was sunset. And so that's just to make it easy. So in terms of translating it to terms that we understand, they regard the start of the workday as 6 a.m., the end of the workday as 6 p.m., and then they do the translating. So in the text, it says at the third hour, and so they call that 9 o'clock. At the sixth hour is noon. At the ninth hour is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And at the 11th hour is 5 p.m., 1 hour before the end of the day. So they're just doing that to make the text more understandable to us, but words like 5 o'clock don't exist in the Greek, okay? So anyway, he sends them in with just this promise, I'll pay you whatever is right. And this is certainly something that a lot of tipped workers understand. If you are a luggage handler at the airport, you don't know what you're going to get paid. You handle the luggage and you get paid whatever you're going to get paid at the end. You might get a great tip, you might get stiffed. If you're a bellhop at a hotel, same thing. You do the work, and you do the work before you know what you're going to get. You are simply hoping that the person who has asked you to do the work will do the right thing by you. So this is not, again, a situation that's unfamiliar to us, where the people go into the vineyard to do the work, simply hoping that they're going to be done right when they're finished with the task. But it's better to be working than not working. And so they go ahead and do this. Now, when it comes to that last group at 5 o'clock, what happens is that the landowner comes to them and says, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" And the interesting thing about this word idle is that it's this Greek word argos, which implies lazy. It's like, why are you standing here lazy all day? And this is definitely something that we are prone to do. We look at a situation, and we often make presumptions about how people got into that circumstance. We have a tendency to presume, and we often have a tendency to presume the worst. So you see them standing all day. By the way, the presumption in the story is that these are people standing at different places. It's not like there's one place in a long line. It's like going around. Just like in this area, there are places where day laborers look to be hired, and they're in different locations around the area. And so what happens is that we often come upon somebody and we see them in a circumstance, and we often presume the worst about how they got into that circumstance. We don't know how they got there. And we have to remember that we don't know how they got there, so it's very difficult for us to be judging a situation as a point in time. All right? When we're doing comparisons, we're often judging a point in time in someone's life against a different point in time in someone's life, someone else's life. And that's not really fair, because you don't necessarily know how they got to that circumstance. You don't necessarily know what led up to them being in that situation. Right? You can have a person who may have gone through an awful lot just to get to where they are, and you have another person who basically got a free pass to this other level. All right? You don't know, and so we have to be careful to remind ourselves not to judge a situation based on this point in time. Because what they explain is really simple. They're like, we're not lazy, no one's hired us. We're not lazy, we've been wanting to work. So far, the day has not been fair to them. They wanted to get hired at daybreak. Because remember how wages worked in those days for the average working person. They didn't have refrigerators, they didn't have a freezer full of food, they didn't have a bank account. All right? You talk about people in this day and age, we all know people who, and some of you in this room, live paycheck to paycheck, right? And so there are a lot of people in our society who live paycheck to paycheck. And in that society, many of the workers were not just living paycheck to paycheck, that was a day's pay to a day's pay. The money they made that day was going to buy food for their family that day. And then the next day, they were going to hope to get some work so they could buy food for their family the next day. So it was a matter of whether they were going to eat or whether they were going to go hungry that night. So life hadn't been fair. Up to this point, they spent the entire day wondering if they were going to be able to feed their families that day. And so they get put to work without any mention of wages, and they go. They don't look for a promise. They just want to go because anything is better than nothing. Some work is better than no work. So they go even without a promise. Remember, here, the landowner doesn't even say, and I'll pay you whatever is right, because to them that would have sounded like almost nothing. It's 5 o'clock. All right? So I'll pay you whatever is right. They would have presumed, just as everyone else in the story presumed, that they were going to basically get nothing. But instead, it's just an offer of work. It's an offer of the dignity of doing something, and they go. But it's a reminder to us, when you think about the plight that they're in, that being left out's a terrible feeling. Being left out's really bad. To be lonely is really bad. Right? To be unwanted, thought unvaluable is really bad. Now, in the classical interpretations of this passage that go back centuries, this was always seen as a metaphor for faith. Okay, so this passage for centuries was taught as a metaphor for people who came to faith later rather than people who came to faith earlier, and basically saying that no matter what, no matter when you come to faith, if you come to faith early, come to faith late, it doesn't matter because you get the same rewards of faith, that you would get the same benefits of faith no matter when you came to your faith. And that was understood to be the classical meaning of this passage. But behind that meaning is understanding that there is still value in being early. All right, the people who got hired first knew from the beginning of the day that they were going to be able to provide for their families that day. Right? They got hired early in the morning and they knew, sure, it was going to be work, but they were ready to work. That's why they were out there. They're ready to work. But they knew that they could take care of their family at the end of the day, and that was comforting. The people who stood waiting to see if they had work all day stood with nervousness and stress the entire day, unsure if they were going to be able to take care of their families. And if this passage is indeed also a metaphor for faith, I think that's one of the things that we need to remember and we need to understand is the comfort that we draw by having faith sooner rather than later. The eternal rewards may be the same. But between now and then is the comfort of knowing a God who loves us, of knowing Jesus, knowing that He cares for us, that He loves us, that He's looking out for us. There's a tremendous comfort in that. There's a resilience in that. There's an ability to get through the hardest days of our lives when we know that may not be there for persons who don't yet have faith. And it's a reminder, just as Jesus sends people into the vineyard all through the day, it's a reminder to us to extend that invitation to others. I'm not talking about going 2 by 2 door to door, okay? I'm not talking about that way of extending the invitation, which is proven to not work very well at all. But it is about being in touch with the comfort that we feel from our faith. It's about being in touch with the comfort of knowing a God who loves us, and it's being in touch with understanding that there are people around us who would benefit from having that knowledge. And so talking about it is an important thing for us to do. Talking about our faith, talking about the role that faith plays in bringing comfort and resilience, strength and confidence into our lives is an important thing for us to do so that other people know that it's available to them. No matter what time of day it is in their lives, it's available to them. When we get back to the story, and at 5 o'clock, they get paid. So what happens is the landowner, has said that he's instructed the manager to pay the people who started work last first. And so he pays the people who started at 5 o'clock first, and they get a full day's pay. All right? Now, I want you to imagine what they're feeling. Imagine this. They just started at 5 o'clock, and they got a full day's wage. They got a full day's wage. Imagine how they feel. Imagine how surprised they are. Imagine how happy they must be. Imagine how a good person would be happy for them, right? I mean, we love feel-good stories in the news. Okay. We love it. We see a feel-good story in the news. We enjoy that, right? We like it. We like to hear about that kind of thing happening. And so think about their elation. Think about how happy you would ordinarily feel for them. And hold on to that feeling as we talk about the rest of the story. Because the rest of the story is about losing that feeling. And who loses that feeling? The people who'd been working all day. So the people who've been working all day, the ones who started at 6 a.m., they're the people who aren't happy because they saw those people who started at 5 p.m. get a full day's pay, and they are thinking, wow, if they got a full day's pay for an hour and I worked all day, I'm going to get like 2 weeks' pay. I'm going to get like 2 weeks' pay. This is going to be awesome. All right? It's the landowner's problem, right, for paying them in reverse. Had he just paid them in the order he hired them, there's no problem. But they believe that this is unfair. And this is a problem. What's fair? This is the problem with talking about fairness as a standard, is that fair is such an elusive thing. See, what's fair? After all, remember at the start? After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Isn't that fair? I agreed with you. I agreed you would do a day's work and get a day's pay. You finished your day's work. I gave you a day's pay. Isn't that fair? This is the problem with fairness. Because, for example, you know the end of this statement. Say it with me. 2 wrongs. Right, everyone knows this. 2 wrongs don't make a right. All right? I learned this early on in grade school. And where did I learn it? I got to admit, after my first fight. Because it's always, he hit me first. Richard? Doesn't matter. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Just because he hit you doesn't mean you get to hit him back. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Why do we do it? Because 2 wrongs is fair. He hit me, I hit him. And this is why fair is not a great standard. Because 2 wrongs is fair. An eye for an eye is fair. And yet, Jesus taught us not to go with an eye for an eye. Because the problem is, somehow it never seems fair to us. And that's why eye for an eye would spiral out of control. Because somehow you would always believe that the wrong that was done to you was greater than the wrong you inflicted in return. Even if it was, in fact, an eye for an eye, you'd be like, yeah, but my eye was more important than his eye. I'm 20/20, he's 20/40, whatever. My eye's more important than his eye. And then it would spiral out of control in this never-ending cycle of trying to achieve a fairness that was never fair. The revenge would never stop because there was always this perception of unfairness, even when things are fair. It was perfectly fair for those laborers to get a day's pay for a day's work. But they perceived it as unfair because they were envious. Are you envious because I'm generous? See, the issue here is envy. They were perfectly happy with the deal until they saw what the other people got paid. Envy is what made it a problem. Adam Grant, a psychologist professor at Wharton, who I quote a lot, I read his blogs and stuff like that, he said this recently. He posted this just a few days ago. He said, "Comparison is not the thief of joy. Envy is. Resenting others' success breeds misery and rivalry. Admiring their success brings motivation and learning." In other words, it's not about saying never compare yourself to others. He's like, never compare yourself the wrong way. It's like, don't live in a bubble where you never look at what other people are doing, but rather don't be jealous of it. Comparison's not the problem, envy's the problem. You should have comparisons, but comparisons to role models who inspire you. Right? If you sat there and said, yeah, this person's doing a really good job, aren't they great? I would love to be more like that person, then that's not a bad thing. It's not denigrating yourself, it's using someone else to lift yourself up, to inspire you to do more, to be better, to be greater, and this is not a bad thing. That kind of comparison is fine. But envy, where you are no longer happy for someone else, that is a problem. We should be glad to see generosity. That should make us happy. We should want to see more generosity even when it's directed at someone other than ourselves. It should make us happy because the world is a better place when there's more generosity in it. The world is a better place when there's more good in it. After all, that's the standard the landowner sets here when he says to one of the complainers, "I am doing you no wrong. I'm doing a good thing here. I'm being generous with these people. I'm not doing anything wrong to you." By the way, that word friend, just as an aside, that word friend in the Greek is this word that does mean friend, but it's only used in the context of a superior to a subordinate. So it's more like, hey pal, I'm not doing anything wrong to you. It's about good versus bad. More people paid is good. More people who can feed their families is good. This is a good thing, and we need to learn to be happy for the good things even when they're unevenly distributed. Do more good, even if you can't be fair. Don't let the inability to be fair stop you from doing something that's good. I love the way Andy Stanley, pastor at North Point Church, put it. He did a whole series on this, and he repeats the saying. He says, "Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone." Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. And his point is simple. All right? There are two possibilities. If you can do for one, but you can't do for everyone, you can either do it for the one and help the one, and one person is helped, one person is happier, or you do it for no one. And how does that make the world better? All right? You focus on spreading good. You focus on doing good. Because the issue is when you sit there and say, if I can't do it for everyone, I'm not going to do it, what you're really doing is you're letting the potential envy and jealousy of the others stop you from doing good. Their jealousy and their envy should be their problem, not yours. If you do good for someone and someone else is jealous of the fact that you did good for them, that's their problem. They shouldn't be jealous. They shouldn't be envious. They should be happy for the person to whom the good thing happened, the way we should be happy when we see those workers who were hired late in the day get a full day's wage, right? That's supposed to be a feel-good story, not a feel-jealous story. But it's hard. Every parent knows this. If you have more than one child and one cookie, we have a problem. But which is better? That one child gets a cookie or nobody gets a cookie? And the reason why you opt for no one gets a cookie is because of the conniption that the other child is going to have. But that's a young child. That's supposed to be a behavior we grow out of. Certainly, that is not something I would have understood when I was 6. When I was 6, if a person came into, say, my grade school classroom and there were, 30 kids in the classroom and someone brought 15 cookies, it's not going to be a happy classroom. But that's because we're little kids. But imagine the child who sat there and said, no, that's okay if I don't get one. I'm just happy to see the other kid get one. Imagine that mythical child who would say that. If there was such a child, what would you say? Wow, that kid is really mature. Wow, that kid's really good. Wow, that kid really gets it. Wow, that kid is an amazing kid. It would be something that you would hope every child would be. Shouldn't that be what we try to lift each other toward being? To be the kind of person who is truly happy when good things happen to other people, even if it doesn't happen to us, because it cost us nothing. It wasn't a wrong that was done to us. It was simply something good that happened to someone else. Shouldn't we have the maturity to not act like a 6-year-old who didn't get a cookie? Shouldn't we have the maturity, the world outlook that says a world with more good in it, a world with more generosity in it is a better world for us all? Because that's the kind of world Jesus wants us to create. A world where we're willing to just have more good in it and not allow the potential of envy and jealousy from others keep us from doing something good. Because if we all did the good that we could, there would be more good that happened to us all. And that would make the world a better place. So let's worry more about the amount of good that we're doing and worry less about the fairness. Because good that is distributed to some is better than good distributed to none. Amen.